welcome back to Building Integrity. I'm your host, Josh Porter, and in this video, we're going to be continuing our conversation on Millennium Tower in San Francisco. I have two other videos that I've done on this building so far, so I don't want to try to recap a lot of that in this video. If you don't know what we're talking about, please stop this video, go and check those out. I'll put a link in the description for those. So one of the things I want to talk about mainly in this video is the solution that has been derived to stop this building from continuing to sink and tilt, and whether that solution is even necessary, because that's been raised in the public forum, if you will. And so I want to go back to 2020 when the Millennium Towers Association had their lawsuit against the developer, had been going on for several years, and in 2020 they reached a settlement. Now, part of this settlement agreement was to stabilize the structure. That was what was being sold to the association. That the developer had an engineer who was going to come up with a solution to stabilize the structure, prevent it from sinking and tilting anymore. And what was pitched to the association was actually that a lot of the angle and the tilt that's in the building would be corrected, and the building would actually be tilted over time, would naturally tilt back to closer to a level condition. Now, the solution involved installing new pilings around the perimeter of the building, but only on the corner on two sides. And these new pilings would go down to the bedrock. And so then in theory, then if they stabilize the low end of the building, then as the rest of the building continues to naturally settle, then it would, in theory, kind of level out. Now, this solution was prepared by Simpson, Gumpertz, and Heger, which I'll refer to in the rest of this video as SGH. And this was spearheaded by Ron Hamburger. Now, to sort of put an exclamation point on this argument that this solution, that some people have made, that this solution isn't even necessary, I want to go ahead and quote a section of an article that was written in the June 2021 Structure magazine by Ron Hamburger and some colleagues of his, and I'll quote this section here. It says, "The Millennium Towers settlement and tilting did not pose a safety issue, but created unacceptable devaluation of the homeowner's investments, especially after national news media publicized the problem. SGH's upgrade design employed conventional underpinning technologies to arrest the settlement," that means to stop the settlement, "remarkable only for the scale of the project, the public scrutiny that occurred, and the sophisticated analysis the team of structural and geotechnical engineers employed to substantiate the design." So he's going back and he's saying in this article, and he has said this in lectures that he's given, and he's said it, I think he's even said it on live camera before, that essentially this fix that they are doing isn't really even necessary for the safety of the building. The building's totally fine, nothing to see here. The structure's totally fine. It can handle an earthquake. The tilting, that's not a big deal, right? So as far as the structure is concerned, he's saying it's not a big deal as far as structural safety and structural integrity of the building. And so the argument then is that the only reason they're even doing this is because local news and national news has picked up this story. It has devalued the property values in the building, and therefore, in order to reconstitute faith in the building in the public eye and to raise property values, we're going to go ahead and implement this fix. But this raises the question, is doing nothing really better? Now, there are people that oppose the fix, and they have made the argument that maybe doing nothing is actually better than doing the fix. But as it sat before this repair was proposed, the building had already violated, or was in violation of, ACI structural limits for tall buildings. Now, ACI is the American Concrete Institute, and they establish codes and standards which are adopted by pretty much every state in America to how to build these reinforced concrete structures. And so the structure, even before implementing the fix, was already, you could argue, depending on how you read the code, that it was right at the limits of ACI. But really, the way I read the code is that it had already exceeded ACI's limits for what they call out of plumbness in a high-rise reinforced concrete structure. Now, there was a geotechnical engineering firm around the time of the lawsuit that had conducted a pretty extensive computer analysis and soil analysis around and under the structure, and they estimated that if nothing was done, okay, that the settlement that the building had already experienced would likely double. And then I guess at that point they figured that it would stop. So their idea was that, okay, well, the building will probably double in tilting before it finally settles and it stops sinking. Well, the problem I have with this is that this makes me a little concerned. I'm not going to make this argument in the positive. I'm just going to say that this makes me concerned. And one of the concerns I have is that if you double the settlement, you have to remember that this structure is not settling evenly. It's what we call asymmetric settling. So one side of the building is settling more than, or I guess this way, one side of the building settling more than the other side, right? And so what this means is that has created a tilt in the building. So if the building continues to settle unevenly, that's going to make the tilt worse. And if you actually, it's basic geometry, if you crunch the numbers, essentially a doubling of the settlement would result in approximately a double of the tipping. Now, as the building continues to increase in tipping, now currently it's tipping just past ACI limits, but it's also, they have analyzed the structure and said, listen, the way it's tipped right now, it's totally fine. It can even handle some more tipping. I don't know if they've calculated that it can handle double the tipping, but an increase in tipping creates the possibility of what's called a divergent condition, okay? And so the divergent condition works like this. As the building tilts, the asymmetric loading on the soil will worsen, which then increases the differential settlement of the building, which increases the asymmetric loading on the soil, which so on and so forth. And it will continue as the building tips more. It's going to put too much pressure on that soil. It's going to overload that new area of soil that didn't have that load before, which is going to cause it to settle more, tip more, settle more, tip more, right? And so you end up in this circular loop where eventually a divergent condition will lead you to essentially a tipping point where it will just continue on its own volition to keep moving in that direction. We call it a dynamic failure. As opposed to a static failure. And so it will continue moving, and that would be my big concern. Now, I'm not saying this absolutely will happen. What I'm saying is that this analysis really hasn't been done. Most analysis that has been done to date is a static analysis. And so what I mean by that is that they look at the building the way it's tipped right now, and they take a snapshot, and they say, this building right now can handle an earthquake, and it's totally structurally sound. And they look at the soils and they say the soils are okay. We do know that it will continue to sink, and then if it continues to sink, is the structure okay? They kind of do this iterative analysis, but nobody has, from what I can really tell, has really calculated or studied whether a divergent condition may exist here or not. And again, I'm not saying that a divergent condition does exist or can exist, but it's certainly a possibility that makes me concerned. All right. So before this solution, remember we're talking about the solution that was proposed by SGH, which was to install piles along two faces of the building on the low end, down to the bedrock, stabilize the building, and let it settle and even out. Now, that wasn't the only solution in the public sphere at the time. There were other solutions presented, okay? But the asymmetric external pile solution, as far as I can tell, when you compare it to the other solutions that I have looked at, it was the least disruptive to the unit owners while this solution is being built and while it's being implemented, while these pilings are being driven down to the bedrock, the building can remain occupied, the plumbing systems continue to work, the electrical systems continue to work, people can still use the elevators, go up to their unit, and live in the building. So it was the least disruptive of the other options that were presented, the other solutions, and it also turned out to be the cheapest solution. And a lot of times disruptiveness and cheapness kind of go together. So in other words, if you're going to disrupt, that means you're usually inside the building and you're causing a lot of destructive work, which is going to be therefore obviously very expensive. Now, the team that came up with this asymmetric piling solution at SGH was warned by several other geotechnical engineers. I found at least 3 other geotechnical engineers that all warned about 2 things about this solution. One, they warned that the solution would make the settling worse. So the way that you would install these piles and that were proposed by SGH would in essence cause dewatering of the soil. It may cause soil excavation, excess excavation, and things which would aggravate the problem, thus making the building settle more. The other thing that they warned about is that once the solution is implemented, now you have an asymmetric loading of your foundation, meaning that only so much of your foundation is actually going down to the bedrock. And in the case of an earthquake, how is the building going to behave? How are these forces going to be transferred from the bedrock into the foundation of the building and through the rest of the building in an earthquake with an asymmetrical foundation? As far as I know, this has never been done before. There's never been an asymmetric foundation like this where only part of a building was driven down to the bedrock and the rest of the building was left with friction piles. So in our next video, and I kind of wanted to keep this short because this is going to kind of blow up into several different categories of discussion here. But in the next video, one of the things we're going to talk about is was this solution that SGH came up with, is it really a conventional underpinning solution, as I'm quoting them out of the Structure magazine in 2021? And did they really use a sophisticated analysis in order to come up with this? I think you'll be interested to find out what some of the what they've been kind of caught on record, kind of admitting as far as the process on how they developed this solution. And what happened when they started installing the new piles? If you're up to speed on this and you've been paying attention to Millennium Towers, you've probably heard that when they started doing the repairs and started installing the new test casings and test pilings around this building and implementing this solution that was presented by SGH, that the building did in fact do exactly what the geotechnical engineers had warned, and it had increased in tilting. And then the last thing I want to talk about is how after that happened, all of a sudden there was a relatively massive redesign of the entire solution, and we're going to talk about that a bit more in the next video. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to talking to you guys next time. Thanks.